Welcome back, everyone. Today's lesson is about experimental probability. Experimental probability is conducting experiments to determine how often something should happen. Basketball is a great place to practice experimental probability because when we shoot the ball, the first thing that goes through our mind is, will the ball go in the basket? Probability says it might, but it might not. So you're probably wondering, what is experimental probability? Experimental probability is determining if something will happen based on attempting that thing over and over again, kind of like shooting baskets in basketball. Experimental probability is the number of times something happens divided by the number of attempts. In basketball, the number of times something happens is when we make a shot, and the number of attempts is when we shoot the ball. So how do we calculate experimental probability? Say you shot the ball 10 times, but only made it in the basket 6 times. The experimental probability is the made shots divided by the attempted shots. In this case, we made 6 and we attempted 10, so we divide 6 by 10. And when we do so, we get 0.6. But for probability, we want it to be in a percentage. So we want to take 0.6 and multiply it by 100 to get 60%. So the probability you will make a basket is 60%. One nice thing about experimental probability is it allows us to make predictions. So you make 60% of your shots. What if you try 200 shots? How many should go in? The way we would figure that out is we would take our experimental probability and multiply it by the attempted shots, and that will equal the predicted shots made. In this case, our experimental probability was 60%. But in order to do the calculation on a calculator, we want the experimental probability to be in the form of a decimal. So we have to remember that 60% is equal to 0.6. Then we multiply 0.6 by 200, which equals 120. So experimental probability says you should make 120 shots, but you might not. Another good example of experimental probability is a coin toss. Say that you flipped a coin and recorded the results in a table. What is the experimental probability of flipping heads? The first thing we need to do is total the tally marks in the table. We have 8 heads and 4 tails for a total of 12. Then what we want to do is divide the heads by the total, because we want to know the experimental probability of flipping heads. In this case, we have 8 heads and 12 total, so we'll divide 8 by 12. When we do so, we get a decimal that we have to round to 0.67. Then we multiply by 100, and the experimental probability is 67%. Let's summarize what we've learned. We've learned that experimental probability is the number of times something happens divided by the number of attempts. We've learned we can use experimental probability to make predictions, and we do so by multiplying the experimental probability times the number of attempts, and that equals our predicted outcome. And we've learned that tables help organize information when doing experiments. If you like this video, make sure you like it down below. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date.